bit about myself. I've been a strength and conditioning coach, fitness coach for many years. I started very young, and like many of you, I'm sure, you just got thrown into a situation. And then what happened there was you start to realize that there was actually a career opportunity. I mean, almost 20 years ago, especially in Canada, there weren't specific soccer fitness coaches. And I had that dream when I realized that it gave me a lot of energy to do that job. And I converted my passion from trying to become an architect or thinking of becoming an architect to becoming a fitness coach very young. I work in football, the real one. We could probably argue about that a little bit. But what happens is no matter what sport you work in, the themes always overlap each other. And I mean, I heard so many good speakers in the last couple of days. And when you talk about passion, everything is underlined by that. I couldn't stress that more with the staff that I work with. I have a staff of 10, and for me that's first and foremost. And then the second that you hear from everybody in the last couple of days is having a systematic approach. It doesn't mean your approach is the right one, but it means, and it's important that it's a clear one. So when you have your systematic approach, you know how you're going to attack your problems and create a better athlete. Okay, so as a fitness coach, I worked in 4 different countries. In Canada with the Canadian national teams and with the Montreal Impact in the MLS. I worked in Italy with a lower division club for a couple of years. Been in Miami. I like the sun. I like the weather. I was there for 2 years, and then I had to move further south to Mexico. And great weather there as well. The club I'm with, let's say it's, and I'll probably get some people ooh and ah, is the Dallas Cowboys of Mexico. Many titles, most prominent. We're actually the gold standard when it comes to a lot of the things that we've implemented, and it's a big honor and pleasure for me to be working there. I have a staff of about 10 fitness coaches, 2 return to play, with 3 other departments, whether it's nutrition, performance analysis, and medical. So my job is to create an integration of all those departments and an approach where all the fitness coaches are working in a certain way. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that approach. I've coined it as the aimed approach many years ago, and there's 5 pillars that make up this approach. Okay, so first off will be assess, second is identify, third is monitor, fourth is enhance, and fifth is develop. Okay, together these 5 pillars, working in balance, will aim to achieve optimal sport performance. The reason why I've coined something as simple as this is how do we balance our efforts? How do we attack our goal setting for each of these areas, each season? And us, we have 2 seasons. We have an opening season and a closing season. So it gives us time to evaluate and going through each of these chapters. So let's talk about assess. In American football, assessment is very important, okay? It's part of your scouting processes, it's part of everything, and as well as in soccer as well. So when you talk about testing, for me it's the first step, and our last presenter was talking about that. If you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're gonna go, okay? It starts with that. When I got on board at the club, there wasn't a testing protocol. Every fitness coach was doing their own thing, but testing, we know, only has meaning if you have a nice database and have reference points within it. So that's one of my first tasks with the club. So when you talk about assessment, you're talking about performance, you're talking about psychological, and you're talking about medical. So up here I have examples, whether it's field tests, agility tests, speed tests, jump tests. Then if you're going back into more of the medical side of things, when you're looking at blood markers, you're looking at body composition using DEXA. And then on the psychological stuff, whether it's the questionnaires like the cognitive abilities or PALMS or REST-Q. If you're familiar with NeuroTracker as well, that's actually one of the tools that we get to use as well, and looking at decision making through NeuroTracker. Second pillar is identify. Okay, when you have results, okay, what do they mean? What are the standards? What are the standards at the professional level, college level, the academy level? And when you have this information, you need to decipher it. You can't just, it's black and white, it's right. What does it mean? Okay, that's why that second pillar is really important, so that way we can form an understanding of our strengths and weaknesses, and create goal setting. And then research projects. And a lot of the literature in soccer is from all over the world, and you can get a lot of information for us. So that's what makes it interesting to say, okay, what does it mean for an academy player in Mexico versus an academy player in England? That takes time to make that understanding. Third is monitoring. What's the difference between monitoring and assessment? Anybody?
Assessment's just your initial evaluation, monitoring to see if what you're doing has indicators and you're meeting them.
Okay, so what he said is assessing is your first steps, and then monitoring is your medium.
You're meeting them as you go.
You're meeting as you go. And as you go can be what? What interval of time? For me, it's every day. Every day is monitoring. So when we think about assessment, we plan that, but every day is an opportunity for you to understand your athlete more. Every day is an opportunity to understand your programming more. And if you don't have monitoring, you end up lost in the fold before you come back to the testing once again. Okay. So we have two forms of monitoring. We have intrinsic monitoring and extrinsic. So intrinsic, when you're looking at heart rate response, hydration, total quality recovery, sleep, and blood biomarkers. That's the response from our training programs and our competitive schedule. Extrinsic is what happens on the outside, and I love that I start hearing a lot more about GPS and looking at mechanical load and what we're doing in football here. In soccer, for many years has been used, and we can go over that in further detail later on for sure. When you're looking at power testing, strength tools, or even video, I think in football, video is phenomenal. I mean, when you go to a training facility and you see how many screens during a practice, and that application is actually starting to happen more in soccer as well. I'll give you a little bit of a background about that, where in Miami, the coach I worked with, he was a World Cup winner. He played over 600 professional games. He played over 150 games for his country. So he knows what it means to be an athlete and the demand that is placed on being a high-level athlete. We went to camp and watched the Miami Dolphins. A good friend of mine invited me to watch training camp, and they couldn't believe, the Italian staff, the amount of detail and the amount of work that goes in from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. in a normal day. If you work in football, you can work in any sport, that's for sure. So they learned to appreciate that, and they say, wow, it's not only what you see in the game, and you say, okay, there's not that many plays for us, I would say, but when you see the preparation that goes on, it's something you need to be proud of for sure. And that's recognized from people when they come and see what's being done. So when you look at monitoring, I'm going to go over a couple little ways that we monitor without expensive tools, without the GPS, without video. And we want to monitor things in terms of invisible training, which is, what is invisible training? Invisible training is everything that happens outside the field. We get to spend maybe 2 to 3 hours with the athlete, but what happens with them in the other 22 to 21 hours? That's what makes the difference. If you really think about it that way and what that balance is, and I have players, for example, that come from 3 hours away to come to practice in the academy, so 3 hours one way, 3 hours the other way, how do you think his invisible preparation is? So these are things that we need to really consider when we're talking about our programs. It's not just about that 2 to 3 hours that we have the athlete. So we need to monitor that as well. So performance, most of you, I'm sure you're familiar with the RPE scale. Okay? RPE scale was initially developed to look at exercise intensity. So whether you're running, it was very correlating to effort in terms of heart rate. So if you gave a 13 out of 20, it was probably around 130 beats per minute. But what has happened with that over the last few years is that's become more of an assessment tool for monitoring training session intensity. So using a scale of 0 to 10, you're able to look at that. So we're going to look at some examples. Obviously, heat, and I learned that quite quickly in Miami, whether it's change of temperature, stressors from the outside, these things all affect in terms of the load of a session. So that's why monitoring different aspects, whether it's out of the field and on the field, can give us a lot more information on a daily basis to improve our program and improve our athletes. So I'm going to show you this chart over here. This is what is called the total quality recovery. What we look at is kind of there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas of invisible preparation. So whether we're talking about nutrition, hydration, sleep and rest, relaxation and stretching. We all know the importance of nutrition. When I found out how much a football player eats, I couldn't believe it. And changes in that and those fluctuations, what that can affect on performance. So if here, what we have is it's set up from breakfast, lunch, dinner, pre-workout snack, and post-exercise carb. And I'm sure you can adapt this to a different situation with your nutritionist or your programs. We allocate points for how well they act in each of these areas. So, for example, if they have a full breakfast, it's 1. If it was just a piece of toast and that's it, then maybe a little bit of a juice, they only get half a point. So especially with the younger athletes I work with, they need to learn these habits. And the only way to do that is start to create accountability and start getting them to really reflect on what they're doing. And we'll do the same with hydration, so pre and post, using whether it's USG pen sticks or whether it's just looking at urine color. Sleep and rest, and we've talked about it in the last 2 days in terms of the questionnaires when they come in. So this could be included in that as well. Relaxation and emotional status. So how do you spend your free time or your rest time? And then stretching and cool down your post-training activities. As you can see, it's very simplistic, and giving them a target on a regular basis can help improve that time off the field. Obviously, to improve performance on the field. At any point, if you'd like to stop me, just like the other presenters, please do so, because I like to create more of an interactive conversation over here. So here's an example, asking a player to review his last 24 hours, collecting the points, and obviously the higher the intensity, you want to get higher recovery as well. So now let's talk about the RPE scale in terms of a training session. So what we do is this, within 30 minutes at the end of a session, we ask, how was your workout? And very often they want to say whether it's good or bad. And that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, how hard did you perceive it? They will have a reference point over time. When I apply this at first in my club, what happened was like, yeah, but do you trust what the athletes tell you? What happens is, as time goes on, they start creating a reference point within it. Okay, and for us to just look at the number and think that's the right answer, it doesn't work that way. What you need to really do is look at them when you're asking them. When you see that, you might ask 1 or 2 questions and say, okay, was it a lot harder than yesterday? And let's say they gave you a 7 and yesterday was a 4, and they're going to say, yeah, it was. I say, you know what, maybe it wasn't that hard. And they're going to give you probably a more reflective number. I'm not trying to challenge the response, I just want to reflect on the response. So what you do from there in your groups, and probably, especially because there's a lot of positional specific stuff in football, is calculate the team average or probably the positional group average and start looking at that. When you multiply that average by the minutes, you're going to get an arbitrary number as a training load. That will assist you in your planning. So when you're talking about your days, Monday, or quite often we talk about in -1, -2, -3, -4 to the game, and trying to compare those days. So my -4s, which will be a Tuesday, if we play on a Saturday, they should be very similar. If I'm trying to push a little bit, I want to convince the coaches that RPE is going to be a little bit higher if we put this in that activity. And that's what I'm going to try to get out of them. Familiar with this? Is this being used quite a bit right now in football as well? Yeah? It seems very simple. And it is, but usually the simple things work best. And especially when coaches don't want to be bombarded with numbers, especially when you're talking about GPS now with all the different metrics, this is something that it's easy to talk about in terms of changing. You want things more intense, you're going to see that an RPE number is going to be higher. You want to spend more time in effect volume, we're going to just talk about minutes. So now we're going to look at the fourth pillar of the aimed approach, which is enhance. And in enhance, we're talking about what we do every day, is training, exercise. I'm not going to go too further in detail, but the real topic today is going to be talking about preparing for strength development. That falls into this pillar right here. And then develop is everything encompassing that. So when we're talking about competition, minutes, and I heard that stat about how many plays somebody played during a week. These are things that add to development. You can train all you want throughout the week, but that is actually a metric that is really important to looking at somebody's development. What is their environment like based on where they train, how they live, like the player I was telling you, traveling 3 hours each way. All these factors are going to add up to whether the performance is going to be adequate or not. Nutritional habits, psychological well-being. So very often in soccer, it's adapting to a new culture altogether. Even myself, or as a coach, I went to a country that I didn't speak the language, understood it a little bit, and 6 months later, it was a growing process, for me and my family. So when you have athletes that you're working with, it's not just them, it's also their families as well that you're thinking about. So when you're looking at these 5 pillars, if you spend more time looking at A and I, it becomes a very laboratory approach. I've worked with the Canadian Olympic Committee, and I've worked in that kind of environment. That has little effect on the sport itself. We're spending government dollars testing and trying to give as much information as much as possible, but we're not close enough to the sport to make a difference. And if you think too much on the sports science side and don't have it married to the sport, then you're not going to really affect any change. Spending too much time just thinking about training and development, which is what we normally do when we don't have any resources or we're not having an approach, you're not going to really understand what that means in terms of performance and where you're heading in terms of the assessments and the monitoring. And that's where M comes in, is for us not to be reactive, but to be proactive. We're having more understanding on a daily basis. So M is the fulcrum of the approach and creates balance through all the areas. And that's why it's the aimed approach. You're aiming towards sport performance. If you spend too much time on one end of the arrow, you're off track. If you're spending too much time on the other, you're off track in the other direction. Any questions about that so far?
So when you bring these group of athletes in, you take a particular period of time to test and evaluate before even beginning the monitoring process and training? Does it take?
So the question is, do you take time for the assessment period before reaching any time with the players? I didn't do that with the first group that I worked with as soon as I came in Mexico, no, because what I wanted to do is not scare the practitioners and the players right away. What happens is when you put athletes sometimes on the pedestal, and this is where the cultures of sports are very important. I have a lot of appreciation for the culture of your sport. If you work in football, is that is part of it. There's a safety net with regards to that. You're going to be tested. You're going to be evaluated. Where in soccer, the evaluation that tends to be on the field in terms of the performance. But we know as fitness coaches and strength and conditioning coaches, we need to support that performance through these assessments. So the short answer is no. The long answer is because I wanted to make sure that we create a relationship first before I put them on that pedestal right away. Go right ahead.
How long do you spend on when you do assess them? How much time do you take?
So how long do I take when I'm assessing players? I try to keep it very simple. So my testing battery right now in the club is broad jump, 30-meter sprint, yo-yo intermittent recovery, whether it's 1 or 2, depending on the age group, and a battery of jumps, whether it's counter movement jump, squat jump, drop jump, single leg jump, left and right with no arms. So I'm able to do that, and I apologize, also FMS. With those components, I can do that over 2 days and 2 one-hour sessions and done. And I'm doing that over periods of 3 months. Every 3 months, we're hitting that now.
Do you use a particular force plate for your jumps?
I use OptoJump. OptoJump, I used it 10 years ago. I've trusted it quite a bit in the past. It's very easy to use, very simple. You get everything from counter movement time, or contact time to flight time, and you actually can do stride frequency and stuff like that on a treadmill, and you can assess gait analysis as well. So the way we apply strength in soccer is a little bit different. Because we spend a lot of time on the field, okay? Pulling players into the gym, or the culture of the gym, is very foreign and very, there's a little bit of a fear factor. So right now I have 8 classifications, and the first 4 take place in the gym, and the next 4 take place on the field. So when we're looking at muscle endurance, we do things with very low loads, whether it's body weight or low loads, very repetitive, whether it's 12 to 20 reps, and it's usually sometimes simple actions and sometimes complicated actions. Then we move into general adaptation, where it's, a moderate load. We spend most of our time probably around here in the gym. Max strength, we touch very little, okay? It's one area that we can probably improve, but our seasons, we don't have off seasons. Our off seasons are very short, so that would be probably the best time to be working on that, because when you have a condensed schedule, we play 2 games in a week, you're not going to get that in, okay? And you're definitely not going to look, a player does not like to be sore during a week. And then power conversion is all your classic exercises, whether you're talking about a power clean or high pull. These are exercises that, soccer players struggle with because the amount of time that they've spent, or lack of time that they spent in the gym preparing. And that's what we're going to talk about later, and how I'm preparing that with my younger athletes right now. So explosive strength, or medium to higher load, more functional base, because at times we will do things where the strength exercise will happen on the field with a technical action. And you'll get that in terms of speed strength as well, where it's very repetitive, okay, where it could be up and down a box, sprinting, taking a player on 1v1. That's how we apply strength a little bit differently. And then plyometrics, whether you're doing things low, looking for reactive strength, or whether you're doing things with boxes or higher and you're looking for power. And that's how we split things up at our club. What I'm emphasizing quite a bit is our teaching pattern. And the teaching pattern is 3 steps. And we talk about mobility first. A lot of the players struggle with mobility because of the lack of training or preparing outside of the field. Then comes coordination. So when you're talking about mobility, we're talking about starting position, intermediate position, end position. Coordination is segments, whether you're looking at left versus right, front versus back. Then we'll talk about speed of the action or load. So whenever we're talking about strength or even speed, this teaching pattern applies. When you're talking about ladder exercises, if you're looking to do it for coordination, you need to take your time, and you actually need to teach and change certain patterns. What happens quite often is we let them go, but we're not correcting. So it's moderate speed, and the coordination of the action is not what we want. So I want to be very clear on what is the objective of our session. So if it's more coordinative, take your time, break it down, and teach. If we're ready, then we move on to speed, or actually increasing load if we're doing things when it comes to strength. So today what we're going to talk about are balances, and you're very familiar with these types of movements. And what I've done with my staff is break them down. So we have for deadlift, squat, and split style, which is a lunge pattern or a split squat pattern. And we have 7 of each, where the deadlift is just the one with 3 different positions, and the others are 7 of each. So what are they? They're mobility and coordination exercises, breaking down movement patterns that we are establishing to develop further through strength exercises. So I have 2 posters just like this in the gym, and right now my fitness coaches are spending more time than the players and working on it themselves, because they struggle themselves with the amount of time that they spent on it. If they're going to be able to show it or teach it, they need to be able to feel it. Like I mentioned, the 3 movement patterns that I'm looking at, and we're going to start to apply that right now. So can I get 2, 3 volunteers? Anybody? Because we've been sitting a lot for last weekend, so I'm sure we're not used to that. Come right ahead, please. Come. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put the slide right up, and I give a dowel to each of you. Okay. So I'm hoping that some of you are not really good at it, but I'm pretty sure you're going to be very good at it. Okay, good, because we need these examples. Okay, just to get into that low position, okay, soccer players have, there's my video, my sideways video. Let's see. Let's just leave it there, okay? He looks better on his side anyways. All right. So what I want to teach my players is the starting position, okay? And we know how important this athletic position is. It is the base of everything. So the biggest complaint of soccer players, like that's from football or that's from track and field, they move regardless. And that's one of the educational processes that is harder. So one of the stats I like to throw back is that they want to do everything with the ball. They actually spend 2 to 3 minutes with the ball and the other 87 minutes without the ball. So what are you doing without the ball? You're still moving regardless. So let me help you move better. Let's look at the first position we're going to talk about is our foot position. And in one of the early presentations, they talked about correcting from the bottom up. And I couldn't agree with more. It usually starts from there. So we'll talk about keeping our feet parallel or in pulling position at shoulder width apart. Okay? So position number 1 is gripping the bar wider than hips. Okay? And getting into the low get set position where the bar's across, back is flat, chest is out, hips are higher than knees. Okay? So what's really important is I want to see the shoulders a little bit ahead of the bar at this point, okay? What happens very often is some guys will actually sit right back, okay, which I don't want, and actually it's very natural for all 3 of them, okay, is to get them into that position right over here. Another correction is that usually you'll see some rotation or external rotation from one of the feet, and I keep saying parallel, 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 and they get that straight, okay? Everybody looks good from here. And if you want to stand up from the back and come closer, you know, my pleasure. And ask questions or point anything out at any of the people in front, they have thick skin, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Also, one of the biggest problems is stability through the knees. So whether you've seen the valgus knee, what you want to do is always, I put my hands on the outside and say push against the line, okay, to create 1, 2, 3 points in line. And what I like to quite often show them, and you can stand up right now, so that, see, that's how strong these guys are. With the players that I'm working with, they're spending 3-4 seconds in that position, and they're struggling, okay? And there's no resistance, there's nothing to that. So imagine what I need to work through or repattern at that point. So I'll get you back into that position, yeah? And I'll put the dowel right in front so that they see that, you know, whether it's in line and create that reference point. And I'll go through that. I'm amazed and not surprised about some of the guys that are working here with, you know, 80 to 100 people at a time. That's not easy, you know, to do these corrections. And what I like to do, and even when I have 24 players, usually that's what my size of my groups are, is I double them up and have them coach each other. Okay, you usually recognize other mistakes a lot easier, and I get excited when I start saying, hey, when I see the guys, hey, but come on, why aren't you doing that, you know, right? So for me, I start to see an understanding. So that's position 1. Chest is out, nice and strong. So I'll get them to hold it for 5 seconds and then stand right up. So position 2 is bar above the knee. Okay, so let's get back down. And then you're going to come bar above the knee. Now the shoulders will be in line with the bar. So that's what I'm teaching them at that point, okay? Because what happens so often is that they want to pull their back away and don't understand how important it is to keep that bar as close as possible to us, okay? I like what I see. Another thing is, nut goes always down, so you'll see that they have a big problem with that. So you got to remember, like, yeah, this is light right now, but it does get pretty heavy fast. And even for them, putting 10 pounds aside, it starts to get heavy very fast. All right, and then all the way up. Now at this point, we're looking, make sure we fully extend, and shoulder is naturally going to be behind the bar. So they get those 3 points. So when I'm teaching my groups, I'll be, okay, position 1. I'll count to 5 inside my head, watching. Position 2. Position 3. And I'll start playing with the rhythm, okay? So I'll say 1. They're away. Good, good. 2. 1. Okay, making sure the hips are moving, right? What happens is I'm not looking for hinging. So 2, 3, and all the way down. Very good, okay? Any comments or questions regarding that? Very simple, okay? What's really important from us is the language and making sure that it becomes very automated. And that because we're you can stand up, guys. Thank you. All right? How did that feel? All good? We got strong guys, mobile guys, we're lucky. That doesn't always happen in soccer, I'm telling you. It's really tough, or young athletes in general that need to start learning, okay? And I'm sure you could share some experiences with me, and I'd like to learn from you and how you've approached that as well. So now, we're gonna move into the squat balance, number 1. So this is position 1. Now, the feet have changed position. I apologize for the video. So everybody knows the standard is that overhead squat. That's what we're trying to achieve. And we're trying to get that with an overhead squat of 3 in the FMS. But I need to create 2 or 3 steps before that, before we get to that point. And so number 1 is putting the bar between our legs and feet in receiving position. And receiving is from the catch phase. And why do we put feet? So I'll tell them 45 because they don't want to understand what receiving position is, but put the feet at 45 out. Okay. Why are we looking to do that on a biomechanical standpoint? We're looking to create the mobility. Okay. With your hip externally rotated, you're able to go lower. It's not because I'm asking them to squat like that in the future, but I want them to get into that deep position and that they have a hard time getting into. So gripping the bar nice and straight, be underneath you, chest out, hips back, and sit as low as you can. And stay right there in a nice stable position. We're going to look for that parallel torso to tibia. They can get to that position very easy, even with having further mobility problems. So I'm going to get the chest out, maybe your hands a little bit lower. So let's get your hands a little bit lower, 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 because you're right way down there. And I don't want them to lose stability. So he's lost stability at the bottom, so I want you to come a little bit higher. There you go. So what happens is you saw his pelvis go down. We want to make sure we're strong and stable at the bottom. If he gets a little bit lower, that's not the position that we want him to feel. What we're trying to do is create feel. Stand all the way up. And I want you to give me 5 reps and holding at the bottom for 3 seconds each time. Okay, so go down. 1, 2, 3, all the way up. Give me 4 more. And we'll keep watching from here. Okay. Keep sticking that chest out. Keep those hips back. Keep knee, toe, and hip in line. So what happens, because these guys are good, it's easy. What you're going to see is that right in. I want him to push out and keep that in line. I'm always putting my hands right there, and I'm getting them to push my hands away to keep that in line. Perfect. How do I feel? Easy, no? So the next one, we're going to start creating the progression from there, is that we had very little torso involvement and very little arm involvement. So now let's get the torso involved. So you're going to put the bar across your shoulders. Okay, perfect. And you're going to do what you were doing. So chest stays out, normal squatting. And so we'll go down, hold it for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, and all the way up. So what I end up seeing a lot when I start making from number 1 to number 2 is you start to see whether they're coming up and down, okay? And that's what I have to start coaching a little bit more because of tightness through the hips, okay? So let's get them to do 2 more for us because they're doing a good job. 1, 2, 3. And we want to make sure that they're being told that the weight is throughout their feet. What happens quite often with soccer players is they have tight calves. They really come forward. The heels really come off the ground. I need them to put the weight right down to their heels, okay? So that it's right through their feet. Give me 1 more. Very good. He's spending a little bit more forward than I want on the far end, okay? So we're just going to get you to do it 1 more time for me. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll just pull. Hold on to that bar. Hold on to that bar. Okay? And come back up. So find that feel at the back a little bit. All right? Cool. Now let's go to the gold standard that we're trying to achieve, okay? So we're going to look at the overhead squat. So this is where my players have a very hard time. And I'll show you where they cheat quite a bit. So let's go overhead, wide grip, so snatch grip. Okay, feet are at 45. What they normally do, okay, because they lack mobility through the posterior chain, okay, is they start to relax their hands. They start to try to, that's where they're cheating, where they relax their wrist. I want them to be strong right here and really feel it. And you see these guys have no problems with that. So let's go to the deep position again, down. Heels are coming up in the middle. Okay, excellent over here. Perfect. Again, holding it for 3 to 5 seconds and then come all the way up. And you see them cheating. You see, these guys not so much, but that's where I catch them. So coaching, making sure the feet are flat, in line, so come down for 5 seconds. Good, out, 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 out. Good, pushing out, chest up. Very good, all the way up. All right. So what happens when I have success in the first two, but then I have a lack of success in this one? What do you normally do in terms of your approach?
Stop them there.
Stop them there. There's one little trick that you've done, and once I say, you'll be like, oh, of course, that you done to help them. There you go. Okay. So when you have a struggling athlete, you end up putting those plates underneath them. So I'm going to do it with you because your heels were the ones coming up a little bit, but you actually were pretty good. And then they notice the difference that they can do. So you can just go for me 3 seconds at a time, 3 seconds down, all the way up. And it changes everything. And for these young players, they need to start feeling that pattern quite often. I have one, if I show you the video, you guys will laugh. He could hardly go to this position over here, and he's a phenomenal player. And if we can make just that slight improvement, I think he will feel better about himself, and he'll be able to do more in the gym as well. Because that is the goal. We want to make them to be able to be confident and make them to be able to achieve more and reach more. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So now the next one, because we have another 4, but I'm only going to show one more, and then I'll get to that. So over here is dropping into that position. Okay. You see him in there. So bar in front. What I'm going to ask you to do is relax and drop into that stable position that you've created while pressing the bar. Okay? So drop, come up, and then replace the bar. But I want them to come up with the bar and bring it back down. So again, one more time. Drop, come up with the bar, and replace. Okay? Keep teaching that pattern. Let's go drop, up, replace. So what they don't understand is why this is so important. So I have to show them the height of the bar stays exactly where it is. You're not pressing the bar. They want to use their upper body. They always want to put their shoulders. So I'm going to ask you, drop, up, replace. I want you to keep an eye on him and the height of his bar. Ready? Drop, up, replace. So if you have that mobility from those other two, you're actually going to improve that quite a bit. All right? Thank you, guys. That's perfect. What I'm going to do is now move on to the split one. So I'll just keep one person right now. Okay, I'll keep you right now. We all familiar with the three-point touch. Okay? The three-point touch in the lunge. So I'll get you to start with that for me. So you're going to have the bar behind you. It's going to touch your head, back, and you're going to put your hand behind here. Right arm up. Right foot forward. Okay? I want to get him into that position here. Forcing this three-point touch or giving him that feedback, he's able to understand his posture. So we'll go up and down. But I want you to keep your foot locked over there. Okay? You're just going to come up and down. Perfect. I want the toe, I coach this toe slightly turned in just to support just a little bit. Just a little bit. Okay? So that way he can push out a little bit. Okay? And keep that stable. What happens is when they are a little bit out, that's when you get the valgus knee. By putting the toe just slightly in, he's able to keep that in line a lot easier and push out and use glute. Okay? Again. Yeah, up and down. He's coming a little bit forward, okay? So we'll keep working on his hip tightness. Then the next step is bar on the shoulder. Same position. Now the torso is going to be a little bit further up. Good. Now he doesn't have that feedback of those 3 points. Now he has to understand that feedback. Okay? And then bar all the way up. Doing the same thing. So now if there's any tightness through his back, his shoulders, you're going to see if there's a difference. Okay?
Do you ever move to a heavier weight? Or is it always down rod or bar?
So the question is, do I ever move to a heavier weight? Not when I'm doing these exercises. And to be honest, they struggle with these positions quite a bit. So there's no weight whatsoever. The goal is obviously to get to weight. So I spend a lot of time, the strength, so it's the general adaptation exercise with very classic exercises and not in these types of positions. What I'm hoping over the next few years is to start to see them have a culture of strength and conditioning, that they're able to do that with weight. So dropping into that position with weight. I probably will never ever do a clean with my U17s or U20s. They just will probably never get the coordination to do it, but I will work on progressions like the high pull and heave press and get to that point there. So that's my goal. All right, perfect. Thank you. Good job. The last couple of slides is where do I take things next, okay? And we have a tool outside here today is with Desmotech, is an isoinertial tool that allows me to start challenging the athletes in all phases of contraction through various positions. So it's isoinertial training, and what they have is 3 pillars, what is called device, technology, and science. And the device is 2 pieces, is a platform piece and a column piece. The technology is the software and always getting feedback, whether it's on the app or the back end. And the science is the academy members, which I am actually a part of. And we share information through other sports, whether it's tennis, whether it's combat sports, hockey, soccer, to see how are each of the professionals using this tool in their respective environments. And in football, quite a bit too. We have the Dolphins that are using it, the Redskins, and I might be forgetting another one, but if you'll see why, if you've used it, why it could be such a good tool for you in your environments. So you're training all phases of contraction, and it's not dependent on load, but rather speed and inertial factors. You're looking to optimize power. Because of you're using speed and load, you'll have power, but how are you going to apply that power? With more speed or with more load? That's going to be up to you and your training program and your objective. Okay? You can safely focus on the eccentric phase. Very often we talk about the eccentric phase, but we refer to and thinking that we're having to put heavy loads. That's not the case when you're using this tool. Okay? When you're using this tool, it's with the speed of your action that will cause you to decelerate. So one of the quotes of a gentleman I met with the Dolphins, he says, we're very good at accelerating athletes, but very poor at decelerating. So what he does is very simple exercises, very aggressive, but you get to see the athletes improve that deceleration phase quite a bit. So you also improve stability and timing because of the dynamic actions that you're applying, and you control the full or limited range of motion. You're not committed to a range of motion like you are in any other machine. You want to do things at a half squat or a full squat within the actual set itself. You could change that up. And everything is measurable. And when things are measurable, like we've discussed already when it comes to the monitoring and the testing, you could actually create a better pathway. So there's 5 areas of work. So you can do things isometrically. You can focus concentrically. In terms of eccentric, it means when you're matching concentric to eccentric. And then, most importantly, eccentric overload, where I'm accelerating, but I'm going to be decelerating a lot stronger than I'm accelerating, which is going to be a percentage of difference in my eccentric contraction. And you can see that through the software. And I encourage you to check that out. And recoil is a technique that's a little bit different. It's where it looks like it's isometric, but you're pulsating. And that's where you're focusing on fascia training and tendon improvement. These exercises are in the videos. I apologize because everything's going to get flipped, but it just goes to show you on how I progress a certain athlete with the same exercises that we did with the balances. And he's able to do that safely with the resistance. So like your question was before, like, do you add weight? I prefer adding some resistance through other means that they can control, okay, versus something that's very free. I apologize for that. And then the same thing with the split style. You're going to have the front and back, and you can change. You can do things a little bit wider, narrower, up to you in terms of your progression. And you're getting constant feedback by having the cord completely attached to you. So whether you need to go, you want to go faster, you want to go slower, you can control that. And the weight is irrelevant because what you're doing is you're creating the force that you're going to have to decelerate based on that. Okay? So, and that's through the two pieces, like I mentioned, through the platform and the column piece. And I encourage you to check that out because that'll be a completely different feel. I was introduced to this about 6 years ago, and I've used it for quite extensively. Quite simply, and the players that I've worked with have always said once, and I'm talking about a North American player, like the Europeans are quite accustomed to it, but the North American player who are used to the clean snatches and to the typical exercises, once they started working with this system, they started realizing, you know what, I can achieve the same things a lot safer without worrying about the complications of a much more complex action. Okay. I think we have 2 minutes now and I want to thank you, and I want to thank Hammer Strength for the opportunity. I love being at these types of events because you hear one or two things and it shapes what you're doing next. So thank you very much. I'll leave the floor open for questions, and I will be available as well. And I did leave my email because to me, honestly, the professional community is small. You could always exchange information, and I will respond quite often. Okay. Any questions?
How much training days, what's your frequency?
So my frequency is, so the question is how many training days, or what's my frequency with my athletes? They train 5 days a week, 1 day off, 1 game. Sometimes it's 2 games. The older age groups, the U17s, U20s, and the second division team, they have double, sometimes 2, 1 or 2 days a week throughout the year. That's to maintain the load of being able to play a Wednesday, Saturday. So you're looking anywhere from a minimum of 5 sessions to upwards of 7 sessions, and that's just training sessions. Anybody else? Yes?
Going back to your squat and split balance, what is the width of the grip that you recommend?
So like we've learned in FMS, we always start with 90 pushing out, okay? That's going to be the most challenging. To make it a little bit easier, sometimes I let them go a little bit further out, okay? I want to create progressions within that. That is the gold standard that we want, okay? But we want them to go a little bit further out to make it a little bit easier so that they could get lower and get underneath the bar. Last question?
Squat progressions as well. Do you always have the guys keep their feet out at 45 degrees, or are they going to point?
So the question is do I always keep the feet out or make them go back to parallel? Great question. No, the goal is to be parallel, okay? They start there so that they can get into the action and move into those positions. But if we would have went to position outside of number 4, then the feet start to get parallel in my next 3 progressions. Perfect. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you around for the rest of the afternoon.